So in our last mini lecture, we were talking about politics, not a big shock given that we're in a politics class, and we defined it as who gets what, when, and how. So it wasn't about governments or governmental institutions, it was about the things that people get and when they get them and when they don't get them and why they get them. And we said that pretty much this means that we're talking about power. And so in this section, we want to talk about two things. One is what is power, and another is going to be how might we study power. And in the case of this class, its name might give it away. We're talking about political science. So we need to talk for a minute about what science is. So what is power? Power is about force. It's the ability to get somebody to do something they weren't really already so inclined to do. So it's kind of like coercion. As a matter of fact, it is kind of a form of coercion. So what this means is that I'm exhibiting power over you if I can get you to read something you wouldn't have already read. It means that I'm exhibiting power over you if I can get you to, not go to the beach when you really love that because, you need to write a paper. These are forms of power, right? Because you have a preference for something else, but you choose to do my thing, right? Read, as opposed to swim. And so thereby I've had power over you. And so when we take a look at politics, we're going to be thinking and talking a lot about power and who has power. Now, we don't want to do this just anyway. I mean, we can look around and say, oh, here's a happy person. He has or does not have power. And of course, if he has it, he's going to be a happy guy. And if he doesn't, he's going to be a sad guy. But however that might be, that's not really systematic. It's not generalizable. It's not something that's useful to you in general. It's not going to help you be a better citizen or a better person. To make something more generalizable, what we need to think about is science. And so therefore we have to ask, what is science? As a matter of fact, bonus points if you understand the joke located right here. If you do, that will make me happy, and if not, well, I'll be sad. But anyway, so what is the science thing, and how can it give us generalizable understandings? Science is about being systematic. It's a way of looking at the world, and as a result, being able to say, this is generally or not generally true, kind of in a big way. And so science is the systematic study of a subject through both or either rational thought and empirical observation. And it normally goes this way, right? You have someone sitting around and they are thinking about something, right? Maybe they're thinking about, I don't know, power, that concept that we're working on. So there's all these different ways that power might work. And then our little scientist actually has an experiment. And that experiment might help, hinder, change the way that he thinks about power. And so our thinking and our empirical observation go through cycles. We think about things carefully and very systematically in different kinds of methodologies, and we'll talk more about that. And then we experiment on the real world. We use actual data to say, does this hold up? Does it not hold up? And it changes the way that we think so that we can then, as you might imagine, have more experiments so we can think about it more and so forth and so on. So science has some key elements that you need to be aware of. One is that science is falsifiable. That's basically a fancy way of saying that it can be shown to be inaccurate. So a scientific statement is something that can be wrong. So if I say that I am 6'2", but, oops, I'm actually only 7 feet, I'm actually 17 tall, I have been wrong. That is what we mean by falsifiability. And it also applies to things in the world, right? So corn is edible, corn is not edible, falsifiable. The other thing that science is going to do is it's going to attempt to explain so as to predict, right? So I want to understand what happens now, that's the explanation part, so that I know what will happen in the future. That's the prediction part, right? And so science, by understanding the now, makes predictions, and then we can see if we were right or wrong, right? Go back to that falsifiability thing. Now, there are a few things that science can't do, and there's one big thing it can't do, and it's going to come up in this class because we're talking about politics. a lot. And that is that science can't produce normative claims. Normative claims are claims that relate to what one can, should, or ought to do. They are about, in short, ethics. Science is not in the business of creating ethics. And it can't do this because it can tell us what happens, will happen, might happen, probably will happen, etc. But it can't tell us what we should or ought not to do. So, for instance, I can tell you how many people have been murdered in Daytona Beach. And we can predict what will happen in the future. But none of that tells me that murder is wrong. Right? Weird? No. It just tells me what's going on. So that whole right-wrong thing, that doesn't work out so well. Now, can we talk about right and wrong in a politics class? Yes, but it doesn't come from science. That's a whole different kind of question, and we're going to get that later. So this seems like a really easy thing to kind of get, but as a matter of fact, it's hard. So imagine we're looking at some data. By the way, this is completely fake data because we're still new students and we're not ready for real data. But until that happens, just remember, fake. But let's assume I did a big old study and I find this, that there is a correlation between how much a country taxes and their percentage as poverty. So we've got poverty as correlated with tax rate. And we see this beautiful linear correlation. In other words, as tax rates increase, poverty goes up. Bing, boom. What ought we to do? The easy answer is to say we should what? Lower taxes, right? The closer they get to zero, the richer we're going to be, and the less poverty there'll be, right? Wrong. It could equally be said true that we ought to raise taxes because everybody who's poor goes to heaven. Therefore, I want everyone to go to heaven, so I'm going to raise taxes as high as humanly possible. At this juncture, you're scratching your head. That's because I've confused you slightly. Science, the graph, it just told us that there's a relationship between poverty and spending. It didn't tell us jack about whether that was right or wrong. For that, we need philosophy. Okay? So keep that in mind. What this means, and then we're going to stop here, is that politics as a subject deals with is and ought questions. So we're going to deal with both science and philosophy. Both things together. What we have to be careful not to do is to assume that science will create our philosophy, i.e. our ethics, or that our ethics can create our science. And so in short, we've got to be careful as students to untangle those issues. And as we move forward in this class, we're going to talk about that more. But for now, that's enough for this mini lecture.